Achewillow, Season 4, Chapter 3, A Clash of Egos and Identities. I have a pretty good memory. Unlike canned goods, my recollections do eventually spoil. But on average, I can store a wide variety of information for long periods of time. While I still pull out the cookbooks and recipes when assembling a menu, it's much more of a question of good habits and best practices than because I forget how to make beef stroganoff or the ingredients to a pad thai. I can, for the most part, recite that information like a straight-A student at a spelling bee. It's easy when they're things you're passionate about. Like the pride I take in remembering what people eat and drink at my cafe. Olivia takes her coffee with a cream and 2 sugars and would, optimally, enjoy an almond biscotti on the side. Or Orlean and Alessandria, who take an espresso and green tea, respectively. Everyone has their thing, and I do my best to remember what that thing is. So when someone walks in and asks for their usual, and I cannot, for the life of me, remember what that is, it breaks the spell. Quite literally. I haven't figured it out yet, but on that day when Olivia Figg instructed me to make sure I remember people's usuals, she introduced me to an ancient tradition, a ritual of the Venerable Order of Customer Service. Not just an Achewillow thing, but an observance that transcends coffee shops and restaurants. To most, that would simply be called good service, but like all things, the custom takes on a whole new meaning here. It's like oversaturating a photo. The image remains the same, but also it becomes so much more. "I'm sorry," I say, leaning over the counter. "I don't think I've ever had the pleasure of serving you, sir." I tried. Damn it, I tried. But there's only so much someone can do in the split second before silence goes from uncomfortable to downright rude. And within that narrow window of time, I could not for the life of me conjure up what this poor man orders from the Achewillow. I can't even remember who he is. His eyes, crystal blue and hidden behind stretched skin, bounce from left to right. He looks like a cat who's been cornered, frantic to find a means of escape. Gnarled fingers from his left hand find the damaged fingers from his right, pulling at the knuckles nervously. He hesitates, still looking around. "I thought I'd ordered here before." The embarrassed fear and deep-rooted confusion he exhibits breaks my heart. I've seen it before. We all have. Dementia, senility, Alzheimer's, or simply the overtaxing of an aged and exhausted mind. There's something all too relatable and sad about someone's sense of self eroding before our very eyes. Like finding that a delicious pastry that you've been saving has fallen to moldering before you could even take a single bite. The passage of time stealing something potentially wonderful. "It's okay." I put a hand on his, giving it a squeeze of sympathy. "You probably haven't been here since I took over for Doris, have you? People say we look alike." His head cocks to one side as he locks his eyes onto mine. For a moment, I'm convinced that the old man will turn aggressive, perceiving a slight to his intellect that I didn't intend. It's something in those eyes, as if they were trying to warn me that I have no idea who I'm talking to. My worry is as brief as it is unwarranted. Worn muscles pull at his lips to force a smile. His other hand covers mine and he returns the squeeze. "You're probably right," he says. "I don't leave home very often. I scare the children." He winks. "I'm sure that's not true. Kids can be cruel, but also incredibly curious. And I bet you've got some great stories to tell." People don't come by their cracks and bumps without a few tales. Judging by the topography of his face, wrinkled but healthy on one side, burnt then mended on the other, this man has seen and survived things. And those are just the scratches on the paint. Who knows what other scars serve as the book covers of his stories? "Oh," he says, looking around the Achewillow, discovering its new look for the first time. "I'm far less interesting than my disfigurement would lead you to think." I find that hard to believe. It's friendly back and forth, ham-fisted banter to try and learn more about this new resident who's lived here longer than I have, the bastard child of small talk. Burnt fingers clasp onto the back of my hand like claws covered in pulled leather. The shock, more than any pain, forces a gasp out of me. A reflexive attempt to pull back my hand is met with force, his knuckles turning white as he holds fast. "I said," he growls, pushing the teeth of his lower jaw forward, "I don't have any stories to tell." I struggled to push a ball of saliva down my throat. While I'd rather not show fear, not in my own cafe, I can't help it. There's something about this man that breathes dread. I want to say it's his body language or the way he talks. I'd love to pretend that it's the cold weight of so many years of experience standing before me. That's not it, though. I'm embarrassed to say that the only scary thing about him is the obvious. "I'm sorry," I say, pulling my hand from under his as soon as I feel his fingers relent. "I didn't mean to pressure you. Let me make it up to you. Tell me what your usual is, and it's yours, on the house." The attempt to apologize is slow to take effect. He's a shrewd old man, prudent before accepting anything offered for free. These hints of paranoia are another form of scars that tell stories, but I'm done pulling at those threads for now. Like a mouse, he smells the cheese, wary of a trap. The loose skin on his neck tightens as he stretches to take a look at the bakery display. His eyes inspect the coffee machine, and his nostrils twitch at the aromas of sugar and tea. Eventually, his features relax and his fingers pull from the countertop. "I'll have a non-fat half-calf mocha Valencia and a pan au chocolat." The order practically sings out of his mouth. It's a practiced refrain of words that have likely lost all meaning through repeated use, each element no longer independent of the other, but rather fused as a whole. I haven't heard an item ordered this way since I wore a pine green apron, working as a barista in Montreal. This is how college students, beaten down by weeks of exams, order their coffee. It's the chorus of office drones parroting the same demand day after day. It has an assurance of self that I wouldn't have guessed from the old man. It's also something that I'm not entirely sure I can put together. Not with haste, anyways. "Here." I put a chocolatin on a dish and push it over to him. "If you don't mind taking a table, I'll have your drink over in a moment." The muddled thoughts return to cloud his demeanor. He blinks at me as if trying to make sense of my words before raising the plate as a nod of acknowledgement. I watch him, hobbling his way toward a table by the window. I feel the pull to walk forth and help him carry his plate, but I know better. I don't know enough to decide if it's just pride on his part or a stubborn frustration at his own frailty, but I doubt he'd welcome my assistance. And I don't want to risk another browbeating. "Well, ain't that something you don't see every day?" Olivia settles the dilemma for me by drawing my attention. I turn to her, eyebrows raised in question. She pushes her mug forward with only a hint of reluctance. She wants coffee, but remains unconvinced of my prowess with the French press. "Helmut Hans," she explains, waiting for me to fill her mug, "is as rare a creature as a North American Yeti." "So," I say, preparing the French press and daring Olivia to protest, "not that rare a sighting in Achewillow?" A chuckle. I'll take it. "Honey," Olivia says, casting a dubious eye toward the freshly filled mug I slide in her direction, "you ought to watch how you talk. You're fast becoming the most interesting thing in Achewillow yourself, you know." Am I now? Oh, I do want her to elaborate, but that is something to unpack at a later date. I'm sure it has something to do with how well Doris's apron fits on me, or how deep I've dug my roots into Achewillow since my arrival. Considering how many failures I've added to my scoreboard in the last 2 months, most of which while trying to help the widow Remington, I don't think this is the best time to wax philosophical over my impact on the town. Not when there's a mysterious old man for whom I need to make a college student's drink and learn as much about as I can. "A bit of a recluse, is he?" I nudge my chin towards Helmut. He settled into a chair and pulled out a tube of lotion, something fancy with aloe vera and floral scents. Not at all what I expected from someone in corduroy slacks. He's rubbing the lotion onto the scars of his hand, using the tips of his fingers in the most dainty way. "Mm-hmm," Olivia offers, stirring cream and sugar into her coffee. "He's an old friend of Julia. Don't let the slacks fool you. That's one of the wealthiest men in town. He even invested in Henry and my business a long time ago. Those scars are from a house fire, by the way. In case you were wondering, which I know you were. Got them trying to save his family. Trying being the operative word here. You have to forgive him if he's sometimes a little off. Damn. I'm always surprised by how much money there is in such a small place as Achewillow. And how much misery. Everyone has a weight around their neck. Some are made of stone, and some are made of sugar. Sweeter, but no less heavy. Only Doris seems to have stood apart from the pack. But that might only be because I know so little about my late great-grandaunt. Hopefully, I can get his coffee right. Make his coming out into the sun worthwhile. Speaking of which, how's your coffee? The question catches Olivia off guard, as if she'd forgotten she was supposed to revile the product of the French press. She takes another sip, paying attention to the flavor anew, making a bit of a show of smacking her lips in the process. 3 stars, she says. Would still not recommend, but would try again. I get the message and reach for the pot, ready to refresh her mug again. Progress. It's happening again. As I'm just about done preparing the non-fat half-calf mocha Valencia, I hear a wave of annoyed and disgusted gasps and murmurs. It happens once in a while. Not so often that it's too big a problem, and it's only been happening for a few months now. It started during the lockdown. I only have myself to blame, really. After all, I'm the one who got in the habit of leaving the back door to the Achewillow open and letting the raccoons wander around unsupervised. Most of them aren't comfortable having me around anyways, and the 2 or 3 brazen enough to strut around the cafe made for somewhat decent company while I had no customers to keep me entertained. They were like keeping the television on in the background while you do the dishes. Noise to help me feel just a little less lonely. Keeping the trash monsters out of trouble and out of my things became a hobby in itself. What I'm trying to say is, while it sounds gross to have raccoons walking around the dining room of a respected establishment like mine, I had reasons that made sense at the time. However, while I can come up with infinite excuses for the liberty I gave these animals, it's significantly harder to explain their presence today. And no matter how intelligent these specific specimen of Procyon lotor are, I challenge anyone to train them out of any bad habit. So when the first, oh my god, percolates through the quiet background noise of the Achewillow, followed by a shriek and a get that thing out of here, I know what's going on. Lucius, the son of a local school teacher who's only barely into 2nd grade, giggles with glee, sealing the deal on who the culprits are. You see, the Don, regal monarch of the garbage empire behind the Achewillow, has a characteristic sway to his fat hips that children can't resist. Meanwhile, Brioche, the closest thing to a pet raccoon I have, always wears one of the scarves I tie around her neck, giving her the distinct look of a cartoon character. They're the boldest of the raccoons, aside from Crimson, the one with the faded red tag on its ear. But that one never pulls anything but terror out of kids. With the firm hand of someone ready to dole out some righteous punishment, I grabbed the broom next to the back door and wade my way across the dining room floor. I'm glad this is happening now, and not in an hour when it would have been Stefan left to handle it. He'd have simply closed down shop and come to me for help. This way, I can shoo away the invading beasts, offer a few complimentary pastries to anyone too offended by the situation, and call it crisis averted. The hell do you think you're doing? As predicted, the first raccoon in my path, weaving between the legs of a, thankfully, empty table, is the Don. His destination isn't even the kitchen or the food display. No, he's going to the front window, a favored spot of his during the lockdown. There, he would sit for hours watching the empty streets. If he got hungry, another one of the raccoons would bring him a stray donut I might have donated, or some scrap dug up from the bin. Now, the bristles of the broom forming a barrier between him and his destination, the Don growls at me. No monarch likes to be told what to do or have his authority disputed, and the Don is no different. He'll fiercely defend those he deems his subject, which raises questions about the scar he inflicted on my left arm, but expects to be obeyed in return. You, sir, are not welcome here. Shoo! I push the broom up to his nose, hoping he gets the message, but instead, His Highness plants his ass on the ground so he can clumsily grasp at the broom. He's like an overweight drunk trying to figure out which of the two door handles in front of him he's supposed to turn. Meanwhile, my clients are slowly pushing their way out of the cafe, bringing whatever plans of ordering seconds, or something to go, with them. With a sigh, I push the Don backwards, forcing him to take a step back before rolling over like a toppled Russian doll. I could just grab him and toss him out. He wouldn't bite me again. We've done this dance before. There would be snarling and gibbering, but claws and teeth would not be brought into the argument. It's just not an option in front of the clientele. Painstakingly, foot by foot, I nudge, prod, and push the pharaoh of filth back through the door he came from. The indignant look in his beady black eyes tells me I'll have to buy some peace when next I get the chance, or risk hearing the dumpster door banging all night. For now, however, I've claimed my victory and can probably salvage most of the afternoon crowd. Or at least I thought so. When I get back behind the counter, having leaned the broom back in place where it belongs, I see her. The customers, some of which are still leaving while most are going back to their tables to finish their meals, don't. She's sitting on her derriere, barely aware of the shadow I cast over her. Needle-sharp claws dig deep into a cinnamon brioche, her namesake, as she chews voraciously on the pastry. "Hey," I whisper between gritted teeth, hopeful that none of the clients at the counter notice. "Go on, get lost. Take your loot and go." Why could she not, like a proper thief, steal her prize and make a clean getaway? Instead, she acts like the tiles by the register are her private boudoir where she can indulge her love of pastry. Maybe I'm being too nice to these animals. Give a creature a name and suddenly they start to have a personality. "Just the tea this time, please." I look up in shock, and for a split second, it feels like William is the one placing the order. William, the cat. Bright green eyes fixate me as he cocks his head to one side, curious and condescending, like I expect any cat to be. After a moment, satisfied that I pose no threat, he sits down on the counter, careful not to push the tip jar aside or topple the mug where I keep the teaspoons for customers. A hand lands between the red cat's ears and his eyes narrow with blissful satisfaction. The fingers are thin and nimble, each knuckle bending and folding with grace, even with such a mundane act as the scratching of a feline companion's head. "Oh, hello, Ophelia." I'm flustered. When am I ever confronted by someone who doesn't like my baking, especially my croissants? It's intimidating, but mostly, it's unfamiliar. My instinct is to try and win her over, to offer another pastry or maybe a pie. I could make breakfast rolls that might make up for the croissant. It's like how Olivia can never find anything good in my otherwise perfect biscotti. I've all but stopped trying with my friend, but I can't imagine giving up on making croissants just because one person in Achewillow doesn't like them. But it will keep me up at night. I know it. "One chai latte coming up." Even as the words escape my mouth, I can tell there's too much enthusiasm. I sound fake, desperate, or like I'm trying to cover something up. Which I suppose is true in various measures for each, but I don't want Ophelia or anyone else to know that. "Thank you," she says, ignoring my tone if she noticed it. "So, a lot of customers walking out." She lets that word hang, leaving only my tapping of the keys on the antique register to fill the space between us. The tilt of her head is at a perfect angle with her cat, as if they were extensions of one another. Her smile isn't quite as condescending, but the sympathy in it is like a cake with too much frosting. So sweet as to become unappetizing. "Oh, it's just that time of day." "Is it now?" She pulls at the sleeve of her wool sweater, glancing at her watch. "I was trying to be here to beat the lunch rush." Round, satisfied cheeks push at her eyes as she grins, making them squint. Insufferable. "Let me get your chai," I say, hoping to make a clean escape. "No rush. I'll be at my table when it's ready." She lifts a worn leather bag overflowing with wool, two thin, ivory-colored needles sticking out of a brown bundle. I have plenty of work to do while they finish installing the shelves at my shop. My table? Who does she think she is? I value my customers, no matter how annoying they can become. I've dealt with hard-of-hearing old men who need the price of their order repeated half a dozen times. I've smiled at a middle-aged mother asking if the almond milk I use contained nuts. I'm a picture of patience to whoever offers me the privilege of serving them. That is the pillar of customer service. But the naked entitlement in that woman's voice. Of course, I find myself replying. Without a care in the world, Ophelia walks her way to a table. For a moment, she contemplates the middle one, the only table that is set, very intentionally, right at the center of the cafe. It straddles the subtle red and blue lines that mark where Canada ends and where the United States begins. This peculiarity of Achewillow is likely responsible for most of the tourism in town. Who wouldn't want to see a city cut between two nations? The moment hangs in the air for a second, as Ophelia seems to debate whether to sit down or not. This is the mayor's table, and while no law of state or rule of my establishment prohibits its use by anyone else, it's a quiet understanding that only the mayors will sit there. With a gentle finger, she touches the surface of the table before shaking her head and moving to another, more suitable candidate. The table she just called hers. Satisfied that no taboo has gone broken in my dining room, I turn my attention to making her chai. Before I can even reach for a mug, however, I'm interrupted by the oddest of confrontation. Ophelia forgot William on the counter. The lean red cat remains seated right where she dropped him, between the register and the cup of spoons. He's looking down at the floor, his neck craned uncomfortably to get a better look. His eyes are near black from being dilated, and his whiskers point forward like antennae probing the air for a scent. He's not yet angry, but the careless twitch of his tail tells me this is temporary. Brioche, half-eaten pastry in hand, is no less disturbed by this intruder towering over her. Back arched and tail like a flagpole, she stares down the cat, ready to either pounce or flee. The counter suddenly vibrates as William lets out a low growl that slowly builds in volume, all directed at my favorite little raccoon. Brioche, on the other hand, takes a moment to shoot me a quizzical look before answering in kind. The blue glint in her eyes seems to ask, "Are you seeing this?" It's only after William releases a threatening hiss that Ophelia finally notices her mistake and rushes back to grab her pet off my counter. "I'm sorry," she says, draping the cat over her shoulder like a mother would a child. "He's usually so much better behaved. The move must have him upset." Before I can respond, and before I can decide if I should institute a more rigid no pets policy, she's already walking back to her table. William, his ears now flat on his head, stares as he's taken away. If he could see through solid objects, his eyes would be fixated still on where Brioche sits, at my feet. "You're late." Stefan slings his messenger bag from his shoulder, damn near tossing the thing into the kitchen. In one continuous motion, he grabs his apron from underneath the counter, where it's kept neatly folded, and slips it over his neck. His fingers are a blur as he fastens the straps around his waist. The guy towers over me. He's probably of a height with Gulliver, who is himself a giant. However, where our friendly neighborhood truck driver is also broad enough to pass for a lineman, Stefan is barely a few pounds heavier than I am. Still, there is no world in which this beanpole of a man should look at me with this much fear and terror. "I'm so sorry," he says, fidgeting around his apron pocket, doing a brief touch inventory of his retail arsenal. Notepad, pens, so many pens, and a handful of change and bills, just in case. "It'll never happen again, I promise. I just had a thing." Hey. I reach up to pat his shoulder, doing a clumsy job of reassuring him. "It's fine. I was just worried. Surprised, even. You okay?" Nerves getting the best of him, he opens and closes the register half a dozen times before turning his attention to the coffee machine. The beast seems to tolerate him more than me. Seems to tolerate everyone more than me. I'm fine. It's fine. I was just looking for a friend and couldn't find them. That's all. Well, as much as my rational side tells me it's probably nothing, this is Achewillow, and missing people do nothing to make me feel any safer. Okay, right. I make room for him to start working. That's fine. No need to worry about 5 minutes of tardiness. He's about to bombard me with whatever apologies come naturally to Stefan when he thinks he's done something wrong. That's just how he is. This boy must have been exhausting to raise. However, before anything can slip out from between his lips, he stops. Knee raised at about hip height, hands to his side as if he were afraid to touch something fragile, he freezes. What? There's a raccoon. Indeed, Brioche is still there, sitting on her haunches, nibbling her pastry. Oblivious to her surroundings, she's been underfoot for the last half hour, graciously allowing me to step around her as I finish my shift. There is. I can't work with raccoons around. She's clean. Miriam. There's a pleading to his voice that straddles the line between annoying and heartbreaking. The same traits that make Stefan such a goddamn amazing employee are also the ones that make him difficult to work with, which isn't a huge issue as we normally alternate shifts. He's fastidious to a fault, as efficient as a stand mixer, clean enough to be a surgeon, and terrified of garbage, blood, and critters. Fine. I lean down to pick up Brioche, keeping her at arm's length so as to be below the edge of the counter. No need for my few remaining customers to start another stampede. But before you start, can you help me clean the kitchen? I had to experiment with a few new drinks, and the whole thing is a mess. To his credit, he does look like he might refuse the offer and tolerate a raccoon at his feet instead. But he knows, and I know, that there's no way he'll be able to do an entire shift with a messy kitchen crossing his line of sight every 2 minutes. Deal, he says, keeping his lips tight. I nod my thanks before taking my raccoon out the back. Thankfully, Brioche is by far the smallest of the animals. She might also be the smartest. All of that makes her easy to keep in front of me and concealed as I turn my back to the dining room. With any luck, everyone is too focused on whatever delicious food and drink I've served them to notice the awkward master chef doing suspicious dance moves on her way out the back door. There, I say, putting Brioche down on the concrete steps. And if you could tell the gang to stay out of the cafe during working hours, yeah, that'd be great. She looks up, blue glow at the back of her black eyes, and I could swear she nods before scampering off. Sometimes I want to believe the raccoons can understand me as much as any other resident of Achewillow. But that would mean they disobey because they're jerks, not animals. Which would not be that surprising, actually. I walk back into the Achewillow, wondering what to make of Brioche's interaction with the cat. I've seen the Dawn and Crimson get into it with a cat before. There's this big gray tabby that will occasionally sniff around the back, looking for his own scraps of food. I've tried to give him some leftover chicken, but the raccoons weren't letting him have it. This was different, though. William was the one acting like the Achewillow was his territory to defend. I hope he's an inside cat, or that, if he isn't, he doesn't investigate the dumpsters behind the cafe too closely. Brioche isn't just the smallest of my raccoons, she's also the most timid. I don't know how I'd explain things to Ophelia if her cat was murdered by Crimson, or the other mean one I haven't named yet. Hell, even the Dawn has a fearsome bite. I should know. Miriam? I stand in the frame of the door, the punishing warmth of the day's sun hitting me in the back. I can see a line of customers building up in front of the register. They're silhouetted by the light in the front window, but I can tell by their body language they're getting impatient. They dance from one foot to the other and look over each other's shoulders. Some make a show of checking their watches, while others glance back at the door, as if trying to decide if this is worth the wait. But it is, and they know it. Right now, I have a situation. Stefan is standing at the threshold to the kitchen. He's white as flour and maybe even trembling a little. Now, Stefan is a little bit neurotic. I think I've been over that. But he's not prone to fear or panic. I don't need him to have another crisis within 5 minutes of the previous one, but I can tell he's been standing there since I snuck Brioche out. What is it? Did you make a non-fat half-calf mocha Valencia this morning? How the hell did he know that? I look over his shoulder and I can maybe figure it out. The ingredients are certainly all there, gathered next to the cutting board, but that seems like a bit of an odd guess to me. I did. First one I've had to make. For a client I don't think I've ever seen before. I know, he answers, a little shaken still. I'm usually the one who makes it for her. Mystery solved. I don't know why this is a situation worth having a panic attack over, but if Stefan's the one who's making Helmut's odd little drink of choice, it explains why the old man thought I knew his usual. I smile with as much comforting warmth as I can, ready to share my explanation with Stefan so he can get back to work when it hits me. Her? Who do you make that drink for? Nancy, my roommate, he answers, still transfixed by the kitchen. Well, she's not really my roommate. I let her crash with me until she can get back on her feet. But this morning she was gone, and we had plans to look for a job for her, and I didn't serve this to your roommate, I explain, infected by his confusion. I served it to some old, rich entrepreneur. I served it to Helmut Hans. Achewillow is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Achewillow to donate. Achewillow has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Achewillow for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Achewillow.